We are wrong. How are you, everybody? Steve Gibson, Air, Oil, and Lead. I'm out here at Createx Colors. I'm going to give you a little bit of a walkthrough of my paint kit, the Grisaille, the Grisaille Gray paint kit that's been out on the market, I think, coming up on 3 years right now. I've never done a formal video and introduction to this gray kit, so hopefully the questions that I have fielded over the past several months, if not the last 2 or 3 years, can put to rest some of the questions people ask me about this kit. So today I'm pretty much just going to discuss some color mixing techniques. Also, the range of color value that you can get out of the palette that's included in this kit. So let's just get to it. The kit itself is 9 gray values. It is based off of the Munsell color system. Also included in this kit is processed cyan, magenta, and yellow, and you can mix a plethora of colors. Traditionally, reds, orange, processed yellow, green, blue, and violet. You can layer the colors transparently, much like process printing does. And you can also mix color value strings, all of which I'm going to discuss right now and show you. Due to the fact that you're mixing your own spectrum and range, you don't get full access to a full color wheel. So if you look over in this direction, the range that you should be able to get out of this color kit kind of falls within the perimeters of the yellow tape. If you want to get the full gamut of color, buy the illustration color wheel set. But your red out of the kit as such mixed will only give you a saturation of about here. Full saturation, you have to buy a red that basically is chemically made, not physically mixed. That being said, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on some of the colors you can mix and the ratios of which they are mixed. So for my red, I use 5 parts magenta, 1 part yellow. My orange is 2 parts yellow, 1 part magenta. I have a green that is 1 part yellow, 1 part cyan. I have a blue that is 6 parts cyan, 1 part magenta. And I also have a violet that is 1 part cyan, 1 part magenta. Again, you're not going to get a full chromatic range out of these, but you're going to get a pretty big bite out of the color wheel or the gamut just from the colors in this kit, which I think is pretty cool to be able to get that kind of a range out of basically 3 colors as well as grays. My process and my style and the way I do things. Most of the time I'm starting with my mixture of 2-to-1 paint to reducer. That's 2 parts reducer, 1 part paint. That's kind of my starting point. I like to spray at a higher pressure also. Generally, my resting pressure is at 60 pounds. I will definitely adjust that, temperature, humidity, and environment. But the way I paint is meant to be layered and opaque on top of opaque. I'll adjust my values with some transparent passes toward the end, but generally it's an all additive process. I don't like to erase. I don't like to use scratching techniques or the like due to what I do for a living. Time is money, and my process is kind of fine-tuned to economy and efficiency as far as time goes. That being said, I'm just going to show you a couple quick mixing techniques to kind of get what's called a color string. So first and foremost, I use the Munsell Gray system because it's a color system that's been around, I think, well over 100 years now. It's been tried and true, used by both scientists and artists alike at this point. So generally, their colors and their values are all broken down into 9 neutral, I would say, a scale of 9 neutral colors based on hue, saturation, and chroma. Right now, we're just going to shift our attention to the gray scale. In my years of painting, sometimes I'll use 5 grays for an image. Sometimes I'll use 3. Sometimes I'll use all 8 or 9. It depends on what I'm doing. Depends how much time I have to do it. There's not a real linear way of doing this. Generally, I like to start in the middle with a value 5 and work my values outward from the center. It gives me careful control over my values, my adjustments. Helps me build depth in a way that's easy to follow, easy to understand. It limits I guess you could say, my ability to make mistakes because I'm not allowing myself to move too far ahead at any given moment. So that being said, I'm going to just show you guys a quick color mixing technique. Using the grays, I'll show you how to tint them in a manner that's very easy to follow if you want to use a monochromatic color string versus just a grayscale. And then I'll use my Moneymaker stencil as an example, a way to show you how to build those values proper. So easy way to mix a nice color string where you're controlling both the saturation chroma of a color as well as I would say the values is to kind of mix what I kind of call a waterfall. And I'll just kind of work the numbers in reverse. So right now is my neutral gray number 9, which is kind of an off-white. I will take my 9 and I will make 1 drop. So 9 to 1. And I'll go to 8. I'll make 2 drops. 1, 2. 7 is 3. And so forth. 1, 2, 3. 6 is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 is 5, no shocker there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And number 1 gets 9 drops. So it's almost the opposite. 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So for this, I think I will go with just a straight cyan. So right now we have 1 drop of a number 9. So I want everything to add to 10 at the end of the day. I want the richness of my lights to be more pure pigment, which is a higher chroma. And as it falls into the shadows, usually color is a lot more subdued and the chroma is a lot less. So I have 1 drop of, say, my off-white or number 9. I'm going to add 9 drops of my cyan, and that'll add up to 10. And I'm going to do so like a waterfall. So where I added 1, now I'm going to add 9. Where I added 2, I'm going to add 8, such and so forth. When I get down to number 1, my neutral gray number 1, I'm only adding 1 dot. So it's going to shift it to kind of a cooler gray, which is kind of, the way things would occur naturally and in its environment. So usually when things, like I said, recess and shadow, they tend to lose their color, such is the way the system works. So let's try this. So I'm going to do 9 now instead of 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 4, 2, 3. Oops. And 1. Oh. Everything's 10. We know we have 10 drops, which roughly works out to, I believe it's about a half a gram. I think it's 20 drops equals a gram of paint. So I'm going to try to reduce proper at least 2 to 1 to get it going. 2, bear with me because it is a video, so things might be off ever so slightly, but you get the concept. And again, the difference between painting opaque and painting transparent is it not only gives you a decent, painting opaque doesn't just give you a decent contrast, it also gives you a lot of depth. It gives your paintings a body that I think is more comparable to what I would call fine art oil painting, which is what this technique is based upon. A lot of painterly techniques that are more in line with traditional brushwork. So when you paint in transparent, I liken the aesthetic and the overall look of that to something that I would compare to like a good pencil drawing. Whereas when you're painting in opaque, it's like that same image, but in an oil painting. If you were to put those two things next to each other, one just appears to have much more body life than the other one for the most part. Whereas, a pencil drawing by comparison just seems flatter. Fantastic drawing, great contrast, even by the best people, it will only embody so much depth. Whereas painting this way and the layering of the process, it just gives it a life and a body that that just painting in simple transparency will not be able to give you. So as you can see very easily, you have a nice color string, high chroma, low chroma. But it's a beautiful range of color to work in. Done quickly, done efficiently. Obviously you can tweak these any way you want, but when you just stick to a given formula and you kind of work the numbers forward and backward and against each other, you can't go wrong every single time. So that being said, I have a full range of color. I can easily probably produce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, at least a value of like 63 different color values. Light to dark, high chroma to low chroma, probably within 5 minutes if I really wanted to. And then I have a full range to pick from, no guessing required, and I can get all of that out of one box kit. Pretty cool. That being said, I'll show you how I work this stuff. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Give me a second. Pen, mark it, 5, 9, 1. So today I'm going to use a stencil to kind of show you what generally the way I would freehand and build a painting. Stencil, for obvious reasons, is much quicker, much more efficient as far as me communicating an idea to you. Stencil or no stencil, I still build an image the same exact way. I try to start on a neutral surface every single time. Today I'm going to start with number 5, and because it's tinted blue. So I have my colors ready right now. I have my 9 value gray that has now been tinted. Now this is a true monochromatic color, chroma being color. Number 9, higher chroma, color cyan, 1 being my darker value right here. So this was what I just made literally within minutes. Again, working the colors against each other. This is straight cyan, processed cyan out of the kit. And if I so choose, go red, yellow, purple, blue, orange, the full spectrum to a certain degree. Again, I can't hit this range out of this kit simply because when I mix, I'm only going to wind up here. A mix here and here isn't going to take me out here. It's just physically impossible. That being said, I'm going to load up my number 5 or my neutral tone, and I'm going to lay down my first layer of paint, of which I would build my image on any way I would approach it. If I'm painting on a motorcycle, I'm still approaching my painting the same exact way. I'm starting on a neutral ground or base. Not sure I have enough mixed up, but bear with me. Laying down my base. Stencil I have out right now is called the Money Maker. This is actually the prototype that I'm using for this demonstration right now. And what I'm doing is I'm laying down a tinted number 5 neutral ground, or a cyan monochromatic number 5 that I just tinted. 5 parts cyan, 5 parts number 5 gray base. And I'm going to mix up some more. So I didn't mix enough. So it's 1-to-1 at number 5. The beauty is if I need to double my mix, I can double my mix. 10, 20 to 20. Obviously work the ratios proportionately to what you need. Concept behind it too is paint economy. There's not a lot of wasted paint when you paint this way. It's by the drop, mostly by volume. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's 13. I'm going to do 13 here. And because it's all numeric, you're going to wind up with the same color value every time. There's no guessing here at all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Maybe a little bit off, but that's all right. Again, I'm going to mix my paint a little bit thicker this time. Generally, I like to start, I think, anywhere from 2 parts reducer, 1 part paint to almost 1-to-1. Again, it depends on what I'm doing, how much detail I'm doing. I don't abide by a specific system for reduction of my paint. What I do almost religiously do is spray at a high volume because, again, in the back of my mind, I'm trying to push the thickest amount of paint I can through the airbrush for the reason I need it for, meaning my motive kind of dictates the way I'm reducing my paint. Right now, I need more coverage, so I'm gonna go with a little bit thicker. Again, because it's a stencil, I have these little registration marks that I'm using for placement for the next value. Let that dry. When I'm hitting the broader areas, I'm trying to overlap almost a half stroke over every stroke. That would be from the auto body shop days years ago. You try to overlap your strokes. Ample dry time. Beauty about this too is most of my steps aren't too big, so I don't concern there is no concern as far as a blue shift, the shifting in the colors. I'm not relying on transparent passes. I'm not relying on fades or blends. Therefore, I don't run into a lot of the same problems that I often hear on social media and among other techniques. Because it is all additive, mistakes are easy to fix. I'm not using the substrate for my lightest value. So, which I find to be nice, especially if a client decides to change their mind halfway through a paint job, that they need another head on that dragon, they want an extra skull. I don't have to backtrack. I'm not worried about trying to get the light back of my substrate. I'm not relying on transparent paint to build up my imagery, which is nice. It makes redirection and fixing much easier, which in the end, if you're doing this for a living, very economical. That's money in your pocket and the ability to provide a service that a lot of people can't, which is cool. So again, I started on a number 5. My next pass is 2 values lighter. It's a logical, easy jump, but it's not too big a jump, it's not too small a jump. Again, if I was doing this skull and I was freehanding the skull, I would be making the same pass with the same value. Obviously, I would probably be putting in a little more detail. And again, I don't mind stencils. I found in the past that what I did, why I did it, and how I did it, stencils more or less slowed me down. That's why I didn't use stencils for a long time. I don't find any reason that I couldn't use stencils. I've just wound up here over 20 years for that matter. At times I've heard this big argument with stencils, against stencils, and this and that. At the end of the day, whatever floats your boat works. Obviously, I'm using stencils right now, so it can't be that big a deal, or I wouldn't be teaching it this way. So right now, 7, same thing. The value 7 with Scion. I'm just using my fingers. Some people use a poker to hold the stencil in place. I'm kind of moving through things somewhat quickly. Again, right now I believe my mix feels closer to a 1-to-1 right now. I'm kind of painting on the fly a little bit. Again, as I'm making my passes, I'm not hosing the paint on the way you think. I'll throw it down and I'll air it off a little bit to help the drying process and move the drying process along a little bit. But my aim is certainly for full coverage. Let me check. There we go. So, moving along. Let that dry. That was our number 7 value. So if you haven't figured out yet, we're making a blue skull, not a black and white skull. Right there. Same thing, now we're going to go to the opposite side. We're going to go 2 steps darker. So when I'm talking about is it helps build contrast quickly. It helps build contrast in a uniform manner where it takes a lot of the guessing away from, am I going too dark or am I going too light? If you take away the ability to go too light, you can't make that mistake. I always say the answer is not to have more tools in your sandbox, it's to use the tools that you have in your sandbox well. So there's no easy answer to the direction, I guess. You can take it and what works for you. I just know that what has worked for me over the years is less is more, and that's what I continue to do to this day. Let me make sure this is dry enough. Number 3 value, we're going darker. So again, what I'm doing now is this is building up the contrast quickly. It's going to establish my image quickly. What I have found traditionally, especially if you're dealing with clients, is you've got their money, they want to see results quickly also. So it helps to establish an image very quickly. It makes everybody happy, it appeases everybody. But it also helps what I call kind of the head game that most artists play with themselves, which is you kind of want to stay stoked on your own project. So if you see results quickly with your endeavors and the way you're approaching something, it keeps you in the game too as the artist. You start getting excited about the product, and it makes the product, makes the project move more into what I guess we would describe as a flow state. You're just going. Everybody's happy, you've got that momentum behind you because your client's happy, and you're seeing results quickly, and that really adds to a successful project right out of the gate. It sets the tone for the entire job, and that's very important at times. I'm actually going to thicken this up a little bit. Again, 3. So number 3, so I'm going to double up my numbers, so it should be 3 parts gray, 7 parts cyan. I'm going to go 6 parts gray, 14 parts cyan. Same ratio, just doubled it. And I'm going to keep my paint a little bit thicker to move it along quicker. Where did I get that back? Wait a minute, 3, 7. Nope. Other way around. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm sorry, it's going to be 7 parts gray, 3 parts this, so it's 14 and 6. Work the numbers, same color every time. No guessing, you're moving quicker. And again, time is money. And if you're a hobbyist, it just takes some of the frustration out and the guesswork out of color mixing. Airing it off. Not sure what reducer. I am using 4011 reducer 2. For anybody in question, a lot of times my go-to reducer has been 4013. And always remember to be patient with it. Let that dry. Clean up the gun. So the idea behind this stencil anyway, I called it the Moneymaker because it was a skull that most people requested years ago, and I'm going back well over a decade. When social media started coming into its own, this was the skull I saw ripped off the most, and I was finding it all over the world to the point where I was actually keeping a computer file of where I saw this skull, how it was being ripped off. So I kind of thought, might as well make $1 off it and provide it for people who wanted to use it. But I also found it to be a very clever learning tool as far as describing my process and my approach to layering color, because whether I was doing it freehanded or with a stencil, it didn't, my approach and my layering process didn't change. So I found it, it served a few purposes. Go. So I've got number 9 loaded up, or I'm sorry, number 1 value loaded up, which is my darkest value. Everything's dry. I'm going to continue to do the same thing. Again, I know some people working on metal will use magnets to make sure that the stencil stays in place better. But for today, we're just using this as an example. So perfection's kind of not on the recipe for today as much as the idea and the process and concepts behind the process take precedent over really any of the image making I'm doing right now. Just taking my time with it. That dry. Load our nice blue chromatic color. This should really give our skull a nice blue to work on top of. So the idea behind the stencil too is once I lay down the stencil, I freehand everything together. And I think as far as traditional stencils work, that's the concept behind it. So right now I have a pretty good value understanding of what this skull looks like. Now I'm going to add some real blue, and then I would go back in with some lighter highlights, some darker recesses, and really tie everything together. The idea behind it is spray it through and freehand too is kind of the working moniker of it. The Moneymaker stencil can be found on my website, or you could find it right through my social media links also. Later on this year, you will see the Moneymaker 2 coming out, which is currently being worked on. Pretty cool stuff. So, knowing how the stencil works and the way things work, I'm already not super happy with how dark the blue is, so I'm going to immediately lighten it up. And again, there's something to be said for intuition too, which seems to escape a lot of people in the creative process. I can see things going in a direction that I need more contrast, and this blue is allowing me right now. So I'm going to shift my own consciously because I know that it's not right. So I'm going to go straight 9 into the bottom of my blue, and it's going to shift things a little bit lighter, give me the contrast I need, and then we'll move forward from there. See, you don't have to be perfect, people. You just have to recognize when you're making a mistake or seeing something that you just generally don't like. Bob Ross would say it's a happy accident. But the idea is being able to recognize that in your artwork as you're moving forward. I can already tell this is going to be much better. Shake it up. There we go. That set up for a minute, we'll reveal what I call a glorified starting point. And it's usually on top of this that you piggyback your image, marry it all together, and make it your own. Okay, so basically, once we wind up here, I use the stencil to kind of accelerate the process of how I build an image. A lot of the time, it would be through a freehand technique that I would wind up here. So I've established my lights, my darks, my mid-tone areas, my overall contrast. Due to the additive nature of this technique, it also builds a depth that just doesn't seem to be present when you're using just a reduced paint. I liken that to when somebody says, wow, that looks so, so real that it seems like you could reach in and grab something. That's the effect that kind of comes with building up a body to your paint that it seems like an over-reduced paint just doesn't give you. That being said, I wind up in a position like this, whether it's freehand or from stencil. Then intuitively, I'll go back to usually a mid-tone value or a mid-tone value hue for that matter. Now we're using blues, and I'll start marrying together some of my harder edges. Those that use stencils frequently are familiar with getting rid of the hard edges that stencils seem to leave. Gets rid of that stencil quality that people often complain about when stencil artwork is discussed. So we wind up in a similar in a similar situation here. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start marrying together some of my mid-tone darker areas. Right now I'm back to like a number 5 value, or right around that. And then I'll probably start working my way lighter and I'll start working my way darker. It's almost like I repeat the same process. And again, I'm trying to run very opaque paint. I'm going for coverage. I'm thinking both abstractly as well as the overall image and what it looks like. Again, as I'm working with a higher pressure, I always call it, you're kind of like controlling your edges. Without the use of a freehand shield or a mask, I'm still getting really, really tight lines because the pressure's so high. I liken it to almost like a controlled blowout. If at times I angle my airbrush, it's going to create a really, really sharp edge, really, really close and comparable to using a handheld mask or even a piece of tape. But because I'm constantly moving, there's a flow to the practice. It makes the act of creating this artwork much more fluid, at least it does for me, and in turn it makes it move that much quicker. But again, just blending it out. I always say, depending on how much time you have, the level of detail you can get is right up there with being photorealistic, but you can also walk away from it in a more painterly fashion. And the style of it is still consistent. It'll still read well aesthetically, be pleasing to your audience. And again, it's right here that I always say you kind of find, I don't know if style is the right word, but you find your own sense of self in it and the way you want to communicate this idea of a skull to the masses or to whoever your client is. Look for that edge, paint it away. And again, because I'm working values and I'm not taking such a large leap of dark over light or light over dark, I never run into this problem of shifting. And honestly, if there was a blue shift, you wouldn't notice because I'm painting in blue. Go figure. Just not my problem in the world I live in with the way I paint. And again, when I paint in the lines that I'm making, I like to kind of create my own texture. I let it build up organically. I always liken it to sculpting. You're trying to define the area, mold it like you're sculpting it with a tool or a brain tool, which is something that you use if you're molding oil-based clay. I'm trying to describe the form with my strokes. I don't like things particularly smooth all the time. Again, there's specific times and places, like if you're painting a child's face, you don't want it all rough and whatnot. But when you observe nature, at least for me, I don't see many smooth airbrush-like surfaces. So I'm not trying to communicate that as an overall idea in the artwork that I'm portraying. In this case, a skull. So right now I'm just going to start lightening up my colors as I go along. I'm going to dump a little bit of 7 in here. I'm going to try this out. If I feel like I need to add a little bit of blue, I will, but I'm going to try the color first. But I'm going to start trying to lighten up some of these areas. Almost lighten up some of my mid-tone grays. Pick a little street area. Again, I'm creating details, but I'm also marrying some of my lines together also. So I'm kind of taking and biting off, multiple things at the same time. But you can see how quickly an image can develop when approaching it this way. You know, I tend to go toward dagger strokes a lot. And the idea for me has always been to try to emulate the traditional paintbrush stroke. That's part of what I'm doing here. It gives it a different feel. A bit more painterly, a lot less airbrushed, and that's something that I like. That calls to me. It's not for everybody. But it's certainly for some people. A little bit of blue. Again, I'm just tinting my way lighter. Be out of it in a minute. Bob Ross, you say, we'll be out of this in a second. A couple more highlights here, a couple more highlights there. Highlights, and I'll call it a day. Again, I've just been working my way up towards some of my highlight colors. And then I'll work my way back down toward black. Give it a look over, some final touches. That's pretty much the approach in a nutshell. You know, and again, then I work toward, you know, my extreme darks and my extreme lights, and a lot of times I'll finish with what's close to black really hits some of the darker recesses of the image, and it really sets off some of the elements. Gives it that depth that I'm talking about. Again, continuously pushing stuff back, but I'm still also marrying some of the darker areas that I'm working on together too. And I think that's about it. And again, I could go on for another hour. I could kind of call it quits probably in about another 20 to 30 minutes and consider this a pretty quality skull for somebody as far as a commission goes. But again, you get a sense of time, you get a sense of what I'd like to call the economy of stroke. It's not overly painted, it's not providing so much information that I consider it needled to death, and I can carry this style consistently from project to project, and it's still considered, you know, my vision and my approach, and therefore my artwork and my style. And that's, you know, technically what people come to me for. The process and the approach allows for the individual artist to find their way of visually communicating the idea of, say, a skull to a potential patron or a customer. Hopefully this was at least an introduction to what my box kit is. Hopefully I will be able to show you more sooner than later as far as unique projects and situations in which different facets of this box kit could be helpful. Thank you for your time.